The Maryland and District of Columbia attorneys general are suing Trump over his corruption. So there's a separate group called CREW, which I think is Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. They sued Trump over him violating the emoluments clause of the Constitution. I'm going to get to that in more detail in a little bit. And now the Maryland and District of Columbia attorneys general go, oh, wow, this definitely has merit to it. So now we're getting in on the lawsuit as well. So let's watch a short video on this real quick. This is from Time.
Never in the history of this country have we had a president with these kinds of extensive business entanglements, or a president who refused to adequately distance themselves from their holdings. President Trump's businesses and his dealings violate the Constitution's anti-corruption provision.
President, above all other elected officials, must have only the interests of Americans at the heart of every decision. Our constituents must know that a president who orders their sons and daughters into harm's way is not acting out of concern for his own business. They must know that we will not enter into a treaty with another nation because the president owns a golf course there. They must know that we will not change our trade policy because a foreign government patronizes the president's hotels or resorts, and that the president will not favor one state over another with millions of dollars of federal money because one state has given his business a tax break.
This is real. This is real. You guys know I get on the corporate Democrats all the time for harping away on scandals that aren't really scandals yet, at least. They do Russia, Russia, Russia all day long, but the reality is Trump hasn't done a single policy that's benefited Russia. So when you talk about how he's Putin's puppet, where's the evidence? You know? And people will say, yeah, well, there's stuff he's gotten from Russia. Really? What? I haven't seen it. If there is, maybe I'm wrong, but I certainly haven't seen it. But even if that was the case, well, then what are they getting in return? What's Russia getting in return? The obvious answer is some sort of sanctions relief or something. But there's been no sanctions relief for what happened in Crimea with the sanctions that Obama put on Russia. And there's been no waiver for the ExxonMobil Russia oil deal, which is a multi-trillion-dollar deal. So there's nothing there yet. If there is something there, I'll be the first one to come out here and call it out. I mean, obviously, it's not like I'm protecting Donald Trump. I despise the guy. I do multiple segments every day ripping him to shreds. But I want the Democrats to focus on things that make sense. And here you have a lawsuit that is as merited as I've ever seen ever. Trump has businesses in at least 12 different countries. So what's going to happen when you have a head of state entangled with all these different countries for a personal financial gain? What's going to happen is those countries are going to get favoritism. There's a million ways for a president like Trump, who has personal business ties all around the world, to bias policy in favor of those countries, and in the process also screw over the American people. So take Saudi Arabia, for example. He registered 8 new businesses there during the campaign. Well, then lo and behold, now that he's president, they announced a $400 billion economic deal with Saudi Arabia, including a $110 billion weapons deal. That is not the correct policy for the American people or for the world, to give a terror state a $400 billion economic deal and $110 billion worth of weapons when we know they're going to turn around and funnel some of those weapons to jihadists in Syria, and they're going to kill women and children in Yemen using weapons that violate international law, by the way, white phosphorus, cluster bombs, you name it. So if he wasn't personally tied in and financially tied in with Saudi Arabia, well, maybe he does a more reasonable policy. I mean, remember, before he ran for president, he called Saudi Arabia the #1 state sponsor of terror, and he's correct in that. But now that you're president and you have personal business ties there, and you have golf courses in a bunch of the Gulf states, now all of a sudden it's kid gloves, and Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, even though they're not. And you 100% buy the neocon line now. So this is a clear example of he has a lot to gain personally by doing the wrong policy. And this is also something he called out Hillary Clinton for repeatedly. When you talk about the Clinton Foundation, for example, they took, I think it was Bill Clinton, took $1 million from Qatar for his birthday and to go give a few speeches there. And Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, approved a weapons deal for Qatar. And this all happened in like the same time frame. So it's like, hey, here's $1 million. Now you'll approve my weapons deal, right? So that's what we call pay-to-play corruption. And there's other examples of this too, all around the world. The Clinton Foundation had so many rich donors around the world who wanted favors for giving money to the foundation. And that's one of the things Trump hit Hillary Clinton on and said, who are you kidding with this? This is so clearly pay-to-play corruption. But now I'm supposed to believe it's different when Trump's in there and he's got businesses all over the world? No, there's no way. There's no way. Just recently, again, to bring up Saudi Arabia, because they appear to be the biggest violator, they gave Trump like $270,000 to stay at his hotel. Why would you give somebody that much money? Because it's pay-to-play corruption. They're not really paying for it. They try to break it down like, oh, yes, X amount was for lodging, and this amount was for food, and this... Nonsense. It doesn't cost that much money to stay there, but they wanted to give him something extra so that they get favors in return. That's how this game is played in Washington. So now it's not only an independent group that's suing Trump, and one of the arguments his lawyers made was, no, they can't sue because they don't have standing to sue. Well, how about the attorneys general of Maryland and D.C.? They certainly have standing to sue. Now, by the way, I would just want to read you the exact provision here of the this is the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. It says, no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any president, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. So in other words, you can't get compensation from any foreign government when you're president. That's what that means. That's how you say that in layman's terms. Now, another one of the arguments that Trump's attorneys made was, well, let's just let Congress decide. No, but hold on. You needed a waiver from Congress beforehand. So in other words, if Congress had approved beforehand that Trump, in a rare instance, accepts compensation from another country, that's fine under the Constitution. But they didn't get a waiver. He had his business empire before he even became president. So you can't, like, after the fact, approve all the individual instances of getting compensation from foreign governments and say it's okay. No, there needed to be a waiver beforehand to do it, but like I said, he's got businesses in at least 12 different countries around the world, and yes, governments are paying him for services. So that's not an option now. You can't say, well, now you go back and let Congress decide. No, now it's a matter for the courts because they're suing you to determine whether or not you violated the Constitution already. And on a plain-faced reading of this, that's absolutely what you did. In fact, I see no other possible interpretation. They're saying you can't accept money from foreign governments. You accept money from foreign governments all the time. And then also let me add on top of all this, isn't it funny how the Constitution makes clear, like, hey, you definitely can't accept money from a foreign government if you're president, because then there's a giant conflict of interest, and how do we know you're doing what's best for the American people? But isn't it funny how it's just, like, viewed as so normal in Washington that, well, yeah, it's crazy accepting money from foreign governments, but you accept money from billionaires here in the U.S., that's perfectly fine. What? You can take money from billionaires, no conflict of interest, no corruption. You can accept money from corporations, no conflict of interest, no corruption. You know, this is what the Supreme Court said, money equals speech. So, corporations, billionaires, no problem there whatsoever. So everybody will look the other way and pretend like there's nothing bad happening. But when it's money from a foreign government to our president, whoa, come on, this is obviously pay to play. Well, why isn't it pay to play corruption when it's a government, when it's a corporation, or when it's a billionaire? That is pay to play. You just refuse to acknowledge it as such. So perhaps the Supreme Court has misinterpreted the Constitution, and they like to pretend that money equals speech when it doesn't. See, that's what they've done. They've decided, yes, the First Amendment is clear. Money is speech. If money is speech, then why isn't prostitution already legal? Why isn't it legal to smoke crystal meth? Hey, you're the ones that said money equals speech. I didn't say it. So by your own logic, if somebody's paying for a blowjob, they're just expressing with speech how much they love blowjobs. Somebody's buying crystal meth. They're not really buying crystal meth. They're just expressing with speech how much they like crystal meth. It's legal to say, I like crystal meth, right? You said money is speech. I didn't say it. So there you go, money's speech. But that's clearly a ridiculous argument, because if money equals speech, whoever has the most money has the loudest voice in the country. And that clearly violates equal protection under the law. Sheldon Adelson, with his multiple billions of dollars, is going to have a louder megaphone and a louder voice than a grandmother in Cleveland who can barely afford her medication. So it's at face value, you can see that that's not what they meant. That's not what the founders meant when they said you have freedom of speech and free expression. They didn't mean you could buy politicians and get favors in response. And I think the Emoluments Clause is actually a hint at that, where, you know, if they meant money equals speech, then why wouldn't money be speech in this instance? Why wouldn't it be okay for a president to take money from a foreign government? If money equals speech, then that's just speech. That's just a foreign government saying, hey, I like you. Here's how much I'm liking you. I'm expressing that by giving you money. But that's not okay under the Constitution. Why? Because money is not speech. So, this has legs, man. And if the Democrats really were serious, they would harp away on this as opposed to the Russia thing, because there's a lot of there in this instance.